Recording in progress.
Thank you. Vice Chair Jennings?
Here.
Trustee Abbott?
Here.
Trustee Avasti?
Here.
Trustee Chandra?
Here.
Trustee Faulkner?
Here.
And I understand Trustee Linder may arrive shortly, but is in traffic. And Chair is here. We will, we don't need to qualify any remote people, fantastic. We can do votes by hand raise, which is also great. Orders of the day, I would actually like to hear item five E after item 5B. If that is all right, do I have a motion to do so? From anyone?
I'll motion.
Thank you. Vice, we have a second?
Yeah, I'll second. I didn't know you needed us to.
Oh, orders of the day, I can just do that by
prerogative,
fiat,
the
okay.
chair.
All right, then we're doing it. All right,
I
done.
think you need us to.
No.
Yeah, we don't do that too often. Okay, so we're gonna hear five E after 5B. And aside from that, I do believe we need to waive sunshine on the closed session item B. Do we need a motion and a second for that? I believe
Yes,
we
you
do.
do.
Okay, do we have a motion and a second?
I motion.
We have a motion from trustee Abbott, a second
Second.
from trustee Chandra. Any discussion, any public comment? All in favor, raise your hands. Okay, we will waive sunshine. At this time, I would like to take public comment on any item that is a potential matter before this board, but which is not otherwise on the agenda, and we will permit speakers up to 3 minutes to make any public comments. Is there anyone here or online who would wish to make public comment? Okay, seeing none, we will proceed with the agenda. And we'll approve the consent calendar. Is there a motion and second to approve the consent calendar?
I'll make a motion.
We have a motion from trustee Chandra. Do we have a second? Second from trustee Faulkner. Any further discussion, any public comment? All in favor, indicate by raising your hands. Thank you. That is the consent calendar. And I believe the next order of business then is to go into closed session. resume our deliberations. Is the recording back on?
Recording in progress.
Thank you. There's no reportable actions out of closed session. And so now we proceed to agenda item 2, death and survivorship. I'll have a moment of silence for those who have served the city and who have passed. Thank you. No, I did that. Yeah, I did that, yeah. We had approved a consent calendar, just to reconfirm. So we're on to agenda item 3A, oral update from our CIO, Mr. Plani.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We do have one item today. It's a discussion of the fee report. And as you all know, we present the fee reports to both boards in September or October, and then take it to the City Council. And we do have a time slot with the City Council for Tuesday, November 5th, Election Day. But today, to present the fee report, we have actually Harrison's here, Harrison and Dinesh. But before I get to the fee report, as I always do, I have unaudited numbers. So as of October 15th, close of October 15th, fiscal year to date, the plan was up 3.94%, and the healthcare trust was up 4.84%. With that, I will turn this over to Dinesh.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I'll go ahead and share my screen.
Please.
All right, so we have before you the calendar year 2023 comprehensive annual fee report. This is on a calendar year 2023 basis, and this is something that's unique because only a handful of pension plans produce such a report that has a detailed overview of the underlying fees that we pay to our investment managers and the costs of administering the investment team and the investment plan. You see quarterly net returns, which are already reduced by the fees and expenses paid to fund managers. And the actual underlying fees are not very transparent, so we try to do this on an annual basis to give you the full picture of how much the investments are actually costing. This is something that we've been doing for 9 years now. We've been doing it since 2015. And to present the results for both calendar year 2023 as well as some of the trends that we've seen since we have 9 years of data, Harrison is going to walk through the report. And quick introduction on Harrison. He's been with our investment team for about 1.5 years. He joined us out of Cal Poly, where he finished both his undergrad and a master's degree. So go ahead, Harrison.
Great.
Yeah, hello everyone. As Dinesh mentioned, I'm Harrison. Thank you for the introduction. And we'll start the overview of our fee analysis for calendar year 2023. To start, we should understand the total expense ratio and what it encompasses. We have our net returns, which are represented by the gross returns net of investment or net of management fees, incentive fees, and operating expenses. Below that in the table, the types of fees are as follows. Management fees are fees paid to our investment managers. Incentive fees are tied to the performance of a fund, and operating expenses are administrative costs of running a fund, while other expenses show us the costs incurred at the plan level, such as staff salaries, consultants, etc. And in terms of our data collection process, we started by sending out the fee template to public managers and an ILPA template to private managers, scrubbing and cleaning the data, looking for outliers, gathering additional fee data for underlying funds, and cross-referencing data with old fee reports. We then aggregate it all together and produce this digestible report to show the data at a plan level. Here we have our 2023 calendar year fees and expenses comprehensively broken out into fund type, which is going to be passive, active, hedged, and private fund strategies. Our management incentive fees, along with operating expenses for the plan, totaled $27.6 million and accounted for 97 basis points of the plan, which is the aforementioned total expense ratio. Below that in green, we can see that at the plan level, we had $2.3 million in other costs, representing just 8 basis points in expenses for the total plan. Now let's shift our focus to the healthcare trust, which totaled $900 million in management fees, incentive fees, and operating expenses, accounting for only 24 basis points of the trust, which is considerably lower due to the fund primarily investing in passive funds with a 75.1% weight in passive allocation. In the table below that, we can see that other costs totaled $0.3 million for the healthcare trust with 7 basis points of expenses for the plan. In this graphic, we detail the total expense ratio over the last 5 years, broken out into management fees in blue, incentive fees in beige, and operating expenses in brown. Below that, each year has its respective plan return net of fees. Comparing 2023 to 2022, we can see that the plan expense ratio increased from 94 basis points to 97 basis points, entirely due to an increase in incentive fees, going from 14 basis points in 2022 to 24 basis points in 2023. And this is because the plan returned negative 9.2% in 2022 and a positive 11.4% in 2023. It is also important to note that our management fees actually decreased from 61 basis points to 57 basis points in that same time frame. Taking this a bit further, we can observe that our management fee ratio, plotted over the past 9 years since 2015, that ratio has steadily declined, ultimately trimming 23 basis points in management fees from 2015 to 2023. Here on our next graphic, we can represent the contribution to management fees by fund type, and this is going to be broken down into public, private, and hedged funds, all within the active strategy type, so this will be excluding any passive fund allocations. And in this graphic, we can observe the brown bar sitting on top, which shows the hedged contribution to fees, which was declining from 2017 to 2023, playing as a big driver of the reduction, progressing from 36 basis points down to 8 basis points in 2023. With all of this fee data at hand, we'd like to emphasize that our investment team is highly focused on saving fees whenever possible, and that our fee savings are achieved through rigorous manager negotiation, early investor discounts, and size-based discounts as well. And these tactics have amounted to a $4.8 million savings in fees in calendar year 2023, and this ultimately highlights our dedication to efficiency when it comes to costs for the plan. That concludes this presentation. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Are there indeed any questions from trustees on the fee report?
What's the breakdown between police and fire and Federated when it comes to other costs?
I couldn't quite hear that.
I don't think you turned.
It's on. I don't know why it's on. What is the breakdown of the other costs between police and fire and Federated?
So police and fire, the other costs were $3.2 million.
So is it like 50-50? I'm
This
trying
is
to
just the
understand.
Federated plan, what we showed in this
Okay.
report.
Yes. But the ratio is,
But the staff is the same, so I'm wondering, is it broken down equally between the two ones?
So this has been prorated based on the market value, so Federated has a smaller
Okay,
weight
got
than
it.
police and fire.
My next question is there a benchmark of other funds costs and basis points? I know it's not included. And thank you so much for the fee savings and all the efforts that goes behind it. I'm wondering if there's a benchmark that you can include in your future presentations of other public pension plans?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that's challenging because there is no benchmark and only less than 10 public pension plans actually produce such a report. And those plans have different asset allocations, different sizes, different uses of things like internal management. So what we can compare to is based on the ACFR financial report data, but those only include fees that are transparent and paid by invoice. And for that, we've included that in past years of presentations, but the database that we use, which is the public plan database, PPD, it hasn't been updated for 2023 yet.
Okay.
So we weren't able to do that, but based on past years, what we found was that the San Jose plans, both Federated and Police and Fire, are squarely in the middle of the pack. So some of the lower plans with lower fee ratios are CalPERS, CalSTRS, for example, And then other plans have higher fee ratios. When we compare against the few plans that produce their version of this comprehensive fee report, I have 2 data points. The first would be the police and fire plan. So for Federated, it's 0.97%. Police and fire is actually coincidentally exactly 0.97% as well. Another plan is the Orange County Employees Retirement System, which is 8 times larger than the Federated plan, at roughly $25 billion of assets. They produced their 2023 fee report and reported 1.17% total expense ratio, so 20 basis points higher than us. And I haven't been able to find any other pensions just yet. There's some others, like CalSTRS, for example, that usually does theirs in November or December that we'll be able to see in the future.
Thank you.
And is CalPERS and CalSTRS different from ours because they have so much more in-house staff that does their investments?
That's part of it, yeah. So they do, for their public investments, they do utilize internal management. So that portion of the portfolio is cheaper. I think what was interesting based on the calendar year 2022 data, CalSTRS was actually reporting a higher total expense ratio than us.
Interesting.
Yeah, the cutoff is roughly 20 billion. When you get to 20 billion or greater, you can actually insource your assets and manage
Right.
it internally. Until then, it's not cost effective.
Right.
So clearly, they have some multiple of that and they're able to do that.
Any other questions on fees?
Just to comment, I want to thank the staff for producing this report. Again, less than 10 public plans do it, and at least at the beginning, it was a big effort. Maybe it's gotten a little bit more systematized, but thank you for doing that. And then I always like to point out that the incentive and success fees means we were making money too. So that portion of the fee is earned because we get a return.
Yeah.
I think if we're benchmarking against others, it would be also interesting to see their breakout of incentive fees versus other fixed costs, and where we stand on that.
I don't think, I mean, other than the 10, I don't think you'll find that data.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm saying if we're comparing it to the other 10, not just on the gross fee level, I would be interested to see that breakout. But if there are no other questions, no other public comments online or in person, thank you so much for the report. We do appreciate it, and look forward to seeing it next year.
Thank you.
We'll move forward. It looks like there's agenda item, there's no old business. So we move to new business, 5A, an oral update from our CEO, Mr. Flynn.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to start by welcoming our 3 new ORS employees, Angelica Santana, Diana Medina, and present today, Gabrielle Ramiro Castaron. Okay. Angelica joined the pension team coming from the police department as a senior community service officer. She comes with over 15 years of experience in working with the city of San Jose. Dina has joined the health team. Dina is new to the city, but is joining ORS with experience managing employee benefits in the private sector. And Gabriella has joined the admin team. Gabrielle comes from PRNS, where she was a rec leader and is an SJSU alumni. Welcome. ORS is continuing to recruit for the senior office specialist position, which we hope to fill by mid-December. We're heavy into open enrollment, which is scheduled for November 1st to November 30th, as the enrollment packets were sent out in October. We attended the San Jose Retiree Employees Association monthly meeting on October 10th and gave an open enrollment presentation to those in attendance. And we are scheduled to attend the Retiree Health Fair at Leiningers Center, November 6th from 10 to 2 p.m. As I've mentioned before, or sure, of course.
Can you guys hear me? Is this working?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I heard rumors, as a city employee, that Kaiser's increasing their rates. Did we get a major increase or anything? Do we know?
Barbara, I don't know if you have the details on that.
Check our newsletter online.
Yeah. I attended the October 10th, and what I would say is that there were increases, I believe, across the board, but, well within.
Significant, or is it significant?
I didn't think that they were significant, but I'm also not a retiree paying close attention, so we can get the actual figures to you after the meeting if that
Yeah,
would
I'm
be
just
helpful.
curious, because East Palo Alto actually is no longer offering Kaiser because the rates went up so high, which I thought was like significant.
Right.
So I was just hoping that wouldn't impact San Jose.
I
Okay.
think we're having trouble getting an alternative.
5% for Kaiser non-Medicare in California, and in Hawaii, 6.86, and Kaiser Northwest, 5%.
And how about the PPO?
Well, that doesn't break it down by PPO or HMO.
But not, I mean,
That's
5% doesn't sound significant,
Mhm.
really, overall, so, okay. Yeah, I was hoping it wouldn't be a trend. But
Mhm.
Kaiser's a monolith, right, in a way, so
Mhm.
one person's getting it, could be rolling down.
Right.
I don't know. All right, thank you.
The ORS lease for our office space is up for renewal in March of 2025. We have conducted a few site visits with some alternative locations, and we are currently working with our current lease provider to assess some additional space in our existing building for our current and projected needs. On September 24th, the internal city auditor gave their annual update to City Council on the status of all open city internal audit recommendations. Barbara and I both attended the meeting. The council accepted the report with very few questions. What I would note is one of the council's 12 priority recommendations included ORS's recommendation to adopt city policies and procedures by retirement services. So we are working to close the gap on that recommendation before the next reporting period. To that end, I met with the new interim director of finance, Drew Corbett. Mr. Corbett and his staff reviewed our proposed ORS policy regarding the procurement and contracting of goods and services. And ORS staff is reviewing the feedback and preparing to meet with with Finance's Deputy Director of Procurement to ensure we understand the intent of the requested. There was only a single change, and we just want to make sure we understand it.
What was the feedback?
I'd prefer to wait
Is
till
it
I
more
have it all ready to go, but we want to make sure that it's consistent across the policy. I think it could be benign, but we just want to make sure it's consistent across the policy. As part of ORS's business continuity plan, our pension administration software is contracted to be able to help ORS to assist with monthly payroll in the unlikely event that ORS cannot perform that itself. ORS conducts an annual mock business continuity event, which was completed with September's payroll successfully. This is something that we do annually with our service software provider. Barbara and I also attended the city's continuity of operations plan tabletop exercise earlier this month, where the city has all of the different departments walk through their continuity of operations plan to make sure that all the integration points, that each department understands all of its integration points, communication points, and that it's still a viable plan. The Retirement Connection newsletter started distribution earlier this week. We are looking at an option to possibly move to a primary digital newsletter. As part of this distribution, we produce 14,000 paper copies. So both from a cost-saving perspective, but also from a green perspective, we'd like to look at opportunities to streamline that and make it a primary digital release. ORS is scheduled to present the annual fee report, as Prabhu mentioned, on November 5th to City Council. And ORS has started to prepare numerous RFPs, one of which we're going to discuss here very shortly, which is for legal services, which is due to expire at the end of this fiscal year. Actuarial services, which is also expected to expire at the end of this year, fiscal year, and then our governance services, which is set to expire this calendar year. Just as a reminder, ORS will be closed on November 11th in observance of Veterans Day, November 28th and 29th for Thanksgiving. A quick transition update. I've completed almost all of my one-on-ones with city council members. I am scheduled to meet with Councilmember Foley on October 28th, and that will be completed. I have completed a series of small group morning sessions with all of the staff and had briefings with all of the division managers, and I will start to schedule staff one-on-ones next week. I am also scheduled to meet Jim Shannon, the director of budget, the budget director, on October 28th to review the combined budget process for both ORS and the city as I start to prepare for fiscal year 26 budget process within ORS. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Any questions from trustees? Any public comments? There is none online. So with that, thank you again. And we'll proceed to the next agenda item, 5B, which is an oral update from our city liaison. Ms. Davis, good morning.
Not a lot to talk about today. We do have the city manager's annual report for the fiscal year 23-24 coming next Tuesday, as well as the encumbrances audit report, where the city auditor found some potential money for us, so that's always a good thing. And then on Friday next week, we're having a study session about artificial intelligence and the city's AI initiatives.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you. Any questions from trustees? Public comment? Okay. So the next agenda item we did take out of order, which is 5E, which is indeed, as our CEO alluded to, discussion and action on creating a joint ad hoc committee with police and fire for procuring and issuing an RFP for legal services. So and we did have a memo on that.
Sure.
Would you like to further introduce it?
So this is a discussion and action on creating a joint ad hoc committee with Police and Fire Board for procuring legal services for ORS and for both boards within a proposed timeline. So as part of the new procurement procedures or updated procurement procedures that we've proposed, the boards have asked for a joint ad hoc committee to be involved in the procurement of legal services. So this memo lays out that three recommendations. The recommendation of establishing a joint ad hoc committee of the two boards, two board members from each board to participate in the procurement process for all 5 legal services used by ORS and the board. This JAC would continue until the selected vendors execute all contracts. The second recommendation is that the JAC and the boards participate in the RFP process for those legal services, which will target to complete action within the proposed schedule defined later on in the memo. And then lastly, recommend procuring separate services for general counsel and fiduciary counsel. This will provide greater flexibility regarding organizational capacity and, for internal and external counsel. So as a reminder, the 5 legal services we're talking about are general counsel, fiduciary counsel, investment counsel, tax counsel, and disability and domestic relation order counsel.
Great. These existing contracts terminate at the end of the fiscal year in June.
Correct.
So we would seek to have new contracts in place by July 1st.
By July 1. So the current outline has the JAC working with staff to review and finalize RFP by the beginning of December-ish. So the staff will produce first draft of RFPs, we'll work with the JAC to finalize those. Staff will then, of course, take care of all the administrative work of publishing those, getting questions from proposers, and then integrating the responses to those questions as part of the standard procurement process that any city department would use. Staff would then review and evaluate proposals to identify interview candidates, meaning we want to make sure that all the candidates meet all of the minimum requirements. Staff and JAC, but I say only as required, complete reference checks. And then the staff and the JAC make recommendations to the full board. That would be targeted to happen at the April board meetings. This would give us enough time then to execute contracts with all five services. It may not be 5 different firms. It could be one, it could be many, depending on the outcome of the procurement.
And it's also dependent on what happens with the budget, too.
100%. So we've started some internal discussions around whether or not we want to move forward with an internal general counsel's position. But regardless, we need to move this RFP process forward in parallel while those discussions are happening both internally with the boards and then ultimately with the mayor's office. So,
another question. It says recommend procuring separate services for general counsel and fiduciary counsel. Is that something that we've decided that we're definitely going to do, or is that just the board will help think about it? I know there's been a lot of talk around that,
Sure.
but I'm wondering where we stand, whether that's a requirement or something that is absolutely up for discussion.
I would say it's not a requirement. It's my recommendation to the board. It does not preclude the board from selecting the same firm for both services. But the way you initiate the procurement, we're saying we want the option of having separate counsel for those two services.
Right, because I know that right now we use Reed Smith for general counsel, fiduciary counsel, and some of the tax services. So they'll be procured separately, but they could be the same.
Correct. To take Reed Smith out of it, if any firm decided to submit for more than one service, each service will be selected based on their own qualifications, based on how the board wants to fill those positions. We will make recommendations based on a scoring matrix that we put into the RFP. But ultimately, it becomes the board's decisions whether or not they appoint each individual or as in totality across all services.
And let me see if I understand. And this committee would also be responsible for deciding whether it's an internal counsel or external counsel?
Not necessarily.
No, that's a separate decision.
Yeah.
That's
So
a
this
separate
is-
decision, okay.
That has to, so what he referenced is there's a budget aspect to this. So we have a vacant position.
Right.
And if we were to delete that position and create this other position and incorporate that in our proposed budget so that it would be adopted by city council in July,
Right.
effective, or the end of June, really, that could be one thing, but, that could be denied.
Yeah.
And so John is he's gonna go at it like that's not approved, go this route, and that gives him the flexibility.
We need to ensure that on July 1st, we have
Counsel.
counsel. And so I thought it best that we work both of those in parallel. But this committee and these recommendations have nothing to do with how we move forward internally. They're
Okay.
separate.
And it's the intention, similar to the process by which we sought new CEO candidates, the joint committee would evaluate RFPs from legal firms applying to bid on these 5 categories, but ultimately the full boards, both boards would decide.
Yeah.
So this would not be floating, beneath the radar. So this is,
Can I ask a question?
go ahead.
Could you point to the governing document which requires establishment of an ad hoc committee for the legal RFP?
You need to talk into this, it's hard to hear you.
I'll repeat the question. So the question was a governing document that requires the establishment of a JAC. Did I get that right?
For the legal RFP, yeah.
Okay. So the procurement policy that this board has proposed to the city sets up that a joint ad hoc committee can be established in order for the procurement of certain services. Legal services is one of them. Another one would be actuarial services, as an example.
So the board can still delegate that to the staff?
The board can delegate that to the staff, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm wondering, running an RFP is a very time-consuming process. And having a governing board running an RFP, it really requires the board members to work essentially as a staff. So I would be in the favor of delegating this to the people who are closely working with the legal attorneys and
I think
have
the
the
concept is
knowledge.
that staff will develop the full RFP document.
Right.
And this joint committee, ad hoc committee, would simply be in the process of evaluating the responses submitted by various vendors, legal firms that are responding to the RFP.
But even the evaluation of responses takes a lot of time. It's not
Again,
an
staff
easy
would be
process.
involved, but I think ultimately they'd be turning to the boards, because ultimately it's our decision to whom we would hire as consultants in
I
this
think
case.
Prachi, Trustee Vasti, we're talking from experience as city employees, and she's actively involved in that, and I know what she's referencing. It is a large commitment of time. So I think what she is saying is that, if staff does this, goes through with this, it's like presenting the annual fees or whatever. I mean, that we don't have to approve, but, where it's being presented to the board as a whole, blah, 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 this is what we think, this is why we think. So I hear what she's saying, that's all.
One of the reasons why I wasn't here for the development of this policy, but I assume the policy suggested it could be a joint ad hoc committee, is because bringing the full boards together to go through an RFP process would be arduous, and we would have to start maybe even a year in advance based on getting quorums and whatnot, where a joint action committee doesn't have the same requirements as establishing quorums and whatnot. But it is a tremendous amount of work. So for those of you who volunteer or are voluntold to be part of that joint action committee, understand that if we received only 2 or 3 proposals for each of the 5 services, you could be looking at anywhere from 10 to 15 proposals to evaluate, which is a lot.
Even 3
Yep.
proposals could be a lot.
It would be a lot. Although, one must look at the memo that attaches here in seeing that we actually had, the last time these were put out for RFP, relatively few respondents. Hopefully, we'll have more now to evaluate, but by no means should we diminish the requirement on the trustees who will be selected for this task. I think it's significant. It's, again, similar and parallel to the task we just went through in terms of having the JPC looking at CEO candidates. We evaluated, I believe, ultimately over 40. I forget the exact number. There were 40 applicants. We winnowed it down. It was a lot of work, and this will be a lot of work as well. So there's, whoever should be appointed or volunteer for this ad hoc committee, it is a significant time sink. Mr. Faulkner.
I'm not sure if this is even an option, but to try to pick Prachi's or Trustee Vassi's brain a little bit on this proposed ownership schedule. It's listed on the agenda. It showcases, as CEO Flynn mentioned, what the JAC would be responsible for, and then what staff is responsible for. If you take a look at that, does that look better, or can we make changes, or what changes would you make if you think there might be a better option?
Yeah, I think that does give some delineation of what what the activities would be of
Yeah.
of
Sorry,
the
it's
joint
page
committee
is
as
the
opposed to
last
staff.
page as well.
And again, that's a proposed ownership and schedule, so I think that is something subject to the joint ad hoc committee modifying that in some way.
It does look like staff tackles maybe a lot of it.
Right.
I would say the JAC getting involved in the identification and the interview of finalists, that could be significant before the recommendations are made to the board. And some of the other proposals, the board members would not be engaged in the identification of the finalists. But I do believe that the general counsel and the fiduciary council, at a minimum, are very important for the boards to understand the capabilities of the candidates that are being proposed. You know, maybe some of the other legal services you'd be more willing to outsource, say, the investment counsel to some of Prabhu's representation on the staff, or the DRO counsel, you'd be willing to outsource that to the benefits team. And such, but the fiduciary in general, I think it's important enough that the board should be involved. So, you know, maybe there's a split of responsibilities even within that, and maybe this JAC could also give guidance on how they would prefer to move forward with that.
I really like the way John articulated that, because, I mean, the two most critical, think about our fiduciary obligations. I mean, when it comes to counsel and actuarial as well, I mean, we have to be principally involved in having no one wants any additional work, but having ad hoc between the good work that the staff will do and then the ultimate decision that 16 trustees will make, I think will expedite things, and now we're on a shorter time frame.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the proposed ownerships. I would suggest to have the staff being involved in the RFP process and make a recommendation to the joint audit committee, just like you do for the disability committee, instead of the committee being involved from the start of the process.
Okay.
So I would suggest a similar kind of makeup of the committee, where the committee is involved after the recommendation of the staff, and then you take it to the board,
So-
instead of from the beginning.
Just so I understand, when you say from the recommendation, you believe that staff should make a recommendation to the board,
So JAC is not being involved in the second step for finalizing the RFP,
okay?
and then,
And they get involved at, next time I'll number the rows here, so freeze. But the third from the bottom, is that where you believe the JAC should be involved?
yeah, the
So,
third from the
okay.
bottom. Unless other trustees feel otherwise.
Well, I do think, I hear you and I agree with a lot of it. But I think the JAC should be involved with interviewing the finalists. I think
Interviewing the finalist?
interviewing the finalists.
So
I don't know if they need, I mean, ideally, when you do an RFP, it's really, it has some qualitative, but it's also mechanical. I mean, because it's basically, here's a checklist, did you do this, boom, 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 boom. You're trying to take out the emotion, and you're trying to set up something and evaluate them accordingly. And so, from that standpoint, I would say interviewing the finalists,
So
certainly.
The
yeah.
March 10th staff and
Yes,
JAC interview.
yeah,
finalists.
yes.
You would agree, you would.
I would think that
that's
would be
the first
good,
point that
yeah.
JAC gets
And then they
engaged.
can make a recommendation to the board, I mean, just like we do on the disability committee or any of these other committees we're in.
That sounds okay.
But yeah,
I think my view of the line item number 2 here, review the finalized RFP, it may not be a huge time sink for the trustees, but I think staff early on, before we get too deep in the process, would want to have a gut check with the trustees to make sure they're asking the right questions in the RFP, to make sure it meets what we're looking for. So I don't know that it would be a massive process at that point. I think the interviewing later on will be a much more intensive process in terms of hours put in.
I think reviewing the RFP, if it was brought to, I mean, I don't think that's something you can have public. I don't think so. I think it has to be.
Look, we did this with the CEO search, and being involved in the review processes, I feel like we're over-engineering at this meeting, but that tends to be my approach, is to stay higher level at our board meetings. It was not an issue. I mean, I unfortunately or fortunately was on that committee, so I can speak personally. There was not a lot of involvement in steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it was appropriate just to have another set of eyes to do a quick review. And I don't think we made many changes to any of the materials. Right, Mark?
That's right.
But
And
in
I
any
think
case-
that committee worked very well. I'm just.
The results were pretty good, huh?
So far.
Maybe the better thing to do is to make, it says the proposed ownership and schedule, and it looks like we're approving this, right? So we make that be, it's a,
Well, I don't think we're,
It's a-
I don't think we're approving this proposed schedule right now. I think we're merely identifying candidates, trustees, to be on this committee. And I think the committee then would finalize what that schedule is and fine tune it.
Well, can I just chime in right quickly? So under, I think for the purposes of the Brown Act, just so the board understands what it designates as the outer boundaries of what an ad hoc committee is and what a standing committee is, so that it's subject to the Brown Act. That might help guide the decision point here. So under the Brown Act, ad hoc committees are exempt from the open meeting laws, so no posting agendas, quorum, all those other things that we typically follow. However, an ad hoc committee is defined as this. It has to be in existence for a limited duration. It has to have less than a quorum of the full board, and it has to be for a specific specified purpose. So those are the 3 requirements for an ad hoc committee. So I believe when I'm looking at this agenda item, that those are the parameters for what you would be deciding for that. And also, you know, because we're forming it, you would have to designate who the individuals would be.
Right. So just to clarify then, the designated purpose, I think, is clear. It's for issuing and evaluating RFPs for legal services. Exactly how we proceed as a joint committee, the order in which we do things, and how we come to that RFP, that does not have to be specified at this juncture.
Well, so the agenda item that as agenda is for today, it has 2 components to it. One of them is for the creation of the ad hoc committee. The second component is within the proposed timeline. So the board can take action on both, or it could take action only on the ad hoc committee and delegate the proposed timeline. It's really up to the board, but those are the 2 agendized topics.
Okay.
If I may, there's also a third, which is to separate the services for fiduciary in general. But for the second, for the proposed timeline, would it be possible for this board to delegate that authority to the ad hoc committee to define?
That's appropriate.
Okay. And I guess my understanding of timeline would be the ultimate goal, which is the June 30th, 2025, as opposed to all of the subsidiary steps that might be taken towards that end.
Sure.
So I hope, is that contrary to
No, I
law?
mean, it's not contrary to the law, but you would have to take into account your contracts expire on June 30th.
Right, and that is our ultimate goal, that is our North Star for solving this problem, essentially.
Our goals would be to have the board to make their, appoint their new vendors in their April board meetings, so that in May and June, we can work to negotiate the contracts with the different services. I would say there's a little bit of time there, but if we had to wait till the June board meetings, then we would be very tight.
So ultimately, the one purpose here is that a ad hoc committee, exempt from the regular constraints of the Brown Act, can move quickly and in an expeditious way and not have all of these detailed discussions at a full board level.
Correct.
Which would enormously slow us down and probably not allow us to achieve the goal by June 30th. So if there,
I would still suggest that since this is a joint committee, so, and with the upcoming holidays, and I do see that there is a crunch of time, I would suggest to take off the JAC from the top and be at the interview finalist level, as Julie suggested,
Mhm.
just to expedite the process.
I agree.
I think what the chair has suggested is that we delegate that to the JAC itself to
Yeah.
determine how it wants to be involved. This way, it doesn't need to be decided today, and once we have the identified candidates for the JAC, we can work together with them to determine if they would like to be involved up front or only in starting with the identification of the interview candidates or with the interview finalists itself.
Yeah.
So we're basically proposing putting through who we want on the JAC.
The existence of a JAC,
Yes,
who the trustees are assigned to the JAC,
yes.
and that's it. I want to,
And the
And then
delegation
that's
of the
it.
authority
And
to the
delegation of the
JAC
authority.
to determine the appropriate involvement.
my own view is
Yeah.
we keep the motion as simple and limited as possible to
Mhm.
provide the maximum flexibility to the
Agreed.
JAC. But insofar as we've had one trustee suggest something, another appear to agree, is that a formal motion and a second, and then we will need to vote on it.
I have one more comment.
Oh, okay,
Sorry.
before we get to it.
So to me, JAC means Joint Audit Committee.
I
No.
know.
And
Okay.
if, and maybe we should call it something else, like JAHC
Okay,
or something.
Jack.
JPC, Joint Procurement Committee?
No, Joint Ad Hoc Committee,
Yeah.
JAHC, I think will
Yeah,
be the ongoing
just so
acronym.
that when we go back, when we look at things, we're not confused.
Well observed, thank you.
We
So-
can
Thank you.
certainly update your procurement policy to reflect that comment, because right now in that policy it does have the Joint Ad Hoc Committee as JAC.
Okay.
Okay, so this is a joint ad hoc. So, again, do we have a formal
Wait a minute.
motion and second
Right.
on the table?
I wanted to comment before.
Okay,
Mhm.
I would strongly encourage us not to do that because
Mm-hmm.
we're now going to have a limited resolution that then police and fire
restricts them as well.
and that will restrict them. And if they
Okay.
don't agree with the restriction, we're just back and doing circling all over again on this. So I kind of
I fully endorse your view, but that would be a point of discussion if we in fact have a motion on the table. And I'm not clear we have a motion on the table. Is that a motion you would like to make?
Just trying to-
or-
So what are you
have
trying to
to
do?
You
Let me
have to do the designation as well, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
you got to speak up,
You have to designate someone, right? Like who has.
Right, but you were suggesting you wanted to get into the details of changing the order of the proposed schedule. Is that a formal motion at this point?
I think I'm fine with your suggestion on the
Okay.
timeline, like keeping it open-ended by June.
Okay,
So I'm fine with that, and I
so
think
what I'm
do you on
hearing
the
is there's no
designation.
motion on that, no
No.
formal motion on that issue. So now we're down to the business of authorizing a ad hoc committee to do this work.
Yeah, I
So-
can make that motion if need be.
Okay, so we have a motion from trustee Linda, do we have
I'll
a second?
it.
Second from trustee Abbott.
I'm sorry, so to do that, you have to identify the number of individuals to the ad hoc committee. Again, it can't be a quorum of the board, so it
Mhm.
has to be less than a majority. So please identify the number of individuals that.
Okay,
would
so
form
if
the
I can make a
committee.
friendly amendment that a two-person from this board, okay? I sense that. And so the second agrees. Is there any further discussion on the formation of a two-person ad hoc committee to work with police and fire? Any public comment? If not, all those in favor of the formation of the board? Okay.
committee.
Committee.
Of the committee, sorry. Didn't have enough coffee yet.
Terrorize the rest.
That's, okay, now to the business of assigning two trustees to be members of this ad hoc committee. So I guess first, maybe I'll simply ask if there are volunteers,
I'm
because we
sorry,
have.
I apologize. Who was the second on that motion?
I was.
Trustee Abbott,
Okay, thank you.
thank you. Are there any volunteers to actually do the hard and
I'll
and
volunteer.
copious work? Okay, we have trustee
that's
Abbott.
I mean, I would like to, but I'm going to be retired by end of February, so I can't see it through.
We need to see it through to the June.
Mhm.
I would like to suggest that trustee Chandra be on that ad hoc committee, as he is one of the few of us who actually has played the role of Perry Mason
The only lawyer, a former
The only-
Oh, yeah, you
retired
are,
lawyer.
right,
So I think he may offer some insights. I know he's done a lot of work serving on ad hoc committees over the past year, so it might be a big ask to ask him to once again step forward.
Yes, I will consider it.
Okay.
Can I repay the favor and increase the number of balls in the lottery bin and suggest that Spencer also consider being on the ad hoc committee? And that is not quid pro quo, actually. I actually think that you could, just based on the experience you and Franco had working with all of our council and under duress, I think that perspective as we think about new fiduciary council could be really valuable.
Very well. I mean, I certainly will volunteer myself to do this work. I seem to manage to have avoided
But we have two people that
two
we
people.
just.
Well, we ultimately will have to vote
Well,
two people.
You
So
can nominate as many
I'm simply
people. Oh, I
taking
see
sort
what
of
you're saying.
suggestions, nominations,
Oh,
if
okay.
you
We
will.
can nominate every single one of us.
Exactly. I mean, we're all
These are
in the running.
nominations.
You can be assigned
All right.
against your will.
Or could we, like we did this on the MOU, could we have a, what's it called?
An alternate, we
Yeah, an
could,
alternate.
but why complicate things further?
Yeah,
Let's-
and
let's keep it-
if it's three, we're all gonna do a good job, so whichever two are
Yeah.
selected will be fine.
I want to keep it as simple as possible so that police and fire can now parallel our work and not, come back with their own suggestions about how to modify it, and then we'll never get anywhere. So, any other potential candidates? Okay, so how exactly shall we proceed? Any discussion about whom we might like to assign this task? Would anyone then like to formulate a motion of,
I move, Mr. Chair, that we have trustees Abbott and Chandra as our two members of the joint committee.
okay? Is there a second? Or is there an alternative motion?
I'll second it.
Okay?
Just trying to keep it moving along.
Okay.
Any commenting now?
Sure.
I would like to heed some of the thoughts of what Trustee Chandra brought up about recommending Chair Horowitz as well. I would not nominate myself as the newest member of the board, and Trustee Abbott, I think you're fantastic. I think that, I would imagine that a little bit of experience in working with the lawyers and the teams would be useful in terms of trying to select a 5-year, a long-term window. I agree with Trustee Chandra as well that anyone would do well, but that's my comment, that I would vote
Okay.
against this if I had a choice to put both of you on and
Okay.
your willingness.
So I'm taking that then as a motion?
Okay,
I
I
think
would,
you
yes,
can't-
I will move
Okay.
to nominate Chandra and Horowitz as
Okay.
for
We
the-
have to do a substitute motion on this, and also there's a motion already pending on the floor for vote.
Okay. So we should we evaluate two motions at the same time, or?
Yeah, the substitute motion would go first.
Okay, so is there a second to the substitute motion?
If that's what you need right now.
Yeah.
second. I'm sorry. Are,
I
Trustee
s-
Fall,
yeah, that
sorry,
I
was
would,
that an
I'm
actual
putting a
motion?
substitute motion,
Okay.
to recommend Chair Horowitz and Trustee Chandra
Okay.
for the JAC committee
Mhm.
on working with our new litigation RFP process.
Okay.
Litigation, I
Is
mean.
there a second to that motion?
I think Prachi did.
second.
Is that right? Was there a second? Okay, so, okay, Robert's Rules of Order, where are you when I need you? So we then need to discuss and vote on the substitute motion? Okay, any further discussion on the substitute motion? The substitute motion is this, to assign Trustee Chandra and myself to the ad hoc committee for the legal RFP. Is there any further discussion, public comment? Okay, if not, we can vote. All those in favor of the substitute motion?
So we have to, should have.
I'm abstaining.
I'm
'cause
abstaining.
Okay.
I would work with.
But I'm sorry,
I'd be
please put
happy
your hands
working
up
with
so I can
Debbie
see
and
them.
with Spencer,
Okay.
so I'm
Yeah.
abstaining.
I'm abstaining since I'm
So we have 3 votes in favor of the substitute motion. Okay, all those opposed?
Well,
1 opposed?
guess-
2 opposed?
I guess.
I'm
Yeah.
So-
abstaining. I'm not putting on anything.
so-
This has gotten a little weird.
did you get the opposed?
I think there were 2 opposed,
There were 3.
3 opposed?
Right.
Mark, did you raise your hand?
Since-
Yeah, I raised my hand.
Since
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not in the substitute.
So it's
And then
So-
one abstain, is that right?
One abstention?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that does not pass.
So that does not pass, right? Did you vote, Debbie?
Yeah, she did.
Okay, yeah,
Yes.
then
Okay.
you're 3-3, right?
All right.
Correct.
Okay, so then we revert to the original motion.
Yeah.
Any further discussion on that? And that is for trustees Chandra and Abbott to be on the ad hoc committee. Any further discussion, public comment? All those in favor of that?
And I'm abstaining.
2. And those are opposed? 2. I all abstain.
Did you abstain?
I'm abstaining on that one. So we're,
This is crazy.
In the same situation.
so we're
it's
at something of an impasse, I guess?
We do.
Right,
Wh- wh-
so,
All right, she'll tell us.
you could continue discussion.
I would change my vote if we can move on. I think anyone would do a good job, so.
I can
if
make
we're
a
gonna be
third
stuck, I'm happy to.
Okay.
Brachi wants to make a new motion.
Oh,
Secede.
okay, go ahead, Prachi, help us.
Okay, I would like to designate Chair Horowitz and Trustee Abbott for the,
Okay, well, I guess we're doing every,
all the combinations. All the combinations.
every possible combination. Is there a second to that substitute motion?
So what was it?
It was that
Trustee
myself
Abbott
and
and
Trustee
Trustee
Abbott be on the ad hoc committee.
I'll second that.
Okay, so we have a second to the substitute motion. Any further discussion? I would simply say the person probably most qualified to be on the ad hoc committee is indeed Trustee Chandra. So I would not be in favor of that particular configuration. But with that said, if there's any other discussion, all in favor of the Abbott-Horowitz combo, please raise your hand.
All in
We
favor?
have one, we have 2. All those opposed? I'm not going to abstain on that one. That's at least 2 opposed.
Well, I'm gonna abstain. I'll abstain.
I think we
I'm sorry,
secede
I
back.
had,
Yep, 2 and
proposed
2.
Bob
Can we make an
Horowitz.
existing motion, the one that's already been voted on, make the motion again?
Chair
you
Horowitz,
can
did you
remotion.
vote no?
Because I would
I
change my
did.
vote.
Wait a minute.
Hold on.
What's,
And we have to also get the remaining votes on the last motion that's on the floor, which is Horowitz and Abbott. So I have yes, Linder and Avasti, no, Faulkner and Horowitz, and
3 abstentions.
and 3 abstentions. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay.
all right, so let me say something. The reason I like to have Trustee Chandra, on it is because he was a lawyer, you know? So he has some legal background, and he also has longevity in the overall, okay?
That's gonna get me put on every ad hoc committee that the election.
Well,
I'm teasing. I'm
But
sorry.
this
No, please
is,
keep
yeah,
going.
and so for that reason is why I stand behind that. And I like a mix. So, I like, all right, I mean, I like a woman, I like different perspectives. So, I mean, yes, okay. Trustee Abbott has, an educational background. She's very tenacious in her interpretation of things. And so for that reason, I think she would be strong. I mean, I think the stronger person, but I don't think the person who doesn't really want to be on it, would be Trustee Avasti, because she has experience with the city and going through procurement. But I don't think she wants to do this. Yeah. But, I mean, I think really, in that case, having a city employee would be beneficial. And I would volunteer, but I'm just not going to be here. So those are my rationale. Nothing against our chair, who I think also brings a lot of quality and good overall investigative input. So that
Okay.
is why I'm standing behind.
Do you want to make a motion?
Trustee Faulkner?
Julie?
Can I
The
make a
fourth, do you want to make
Yeah,
a fourth motion?
Of course.
Could I move to re-motion? Can I move to approve Trustee Abbott and Trustee Chandra for this committee, even though we've already voted on it?
I think we almost have to.
Yeah.
So,
If you get a second, we can vote.
Could I?
Oh.
I'll make that
Mhm.
You're
motion
making the motion, I'll
to
second.
approve those two.
Okay, is there a second to that motion?
Me.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to appoint trustees Abbott and Chandra to the ad hoc committee. In terms of further discussion, I will say, allow me to withdraw my candidacy to expedite the election of this position. And And with that said, all those in favor of that assignment,
I guess I can.
opposed? We have our ad hoc committee.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
So the next item for action would be to recommend to give the JAC the authority to meet the deadline however it sees fit.
Okay, so do we have such a motion?
Let me, wait a minute, before we go forward, I just want to say one thing. Because I have done procurement, I think Trustee Abasti has done it as well. But there are times when we don't meet the deadline, okay, in the city, like surprise here. And in those cases, there are extensions that have been, so there are extensions that you can work with the vendor or the contractor, whoever you're dealing with, the agency, for like 6 months or whatever. So we want to meet the deadline. We want to show that we're on top of this. We're doing this and coming early into it. So I think it's totally feasible. But I just want to add that into the record so that there's a process you follow. You need to follow that, but then you do have a little wiggle room if you need it.
Thank you.
The board can always shift the deadline if we need to. But I think it's good to have a goal.
Yes.
Say that's our target.
Yeah.
This is a highly visible, controversial issue. So we need to really stay on top of it.
We need to see this as a pretty hard deadline, but obviously things can
But yes,
slip
you can
if
change it.
the process
Things
slips
happen.
on us, so. But we did have a motion to essentially assign the,
Give the authority to the JAC to determine the timeline and its involvement.
Okay.
Yeah, we
that,
decided, we
okay,
just set the deadline, we didn't set the schedule.
Correct.
Yeah.
right. So,
Both the ownership and the timeline.
the ownership and timeline, which are the requirements for the ad hoc committee. So we have a motion from trustee Linda. Do we have a second?
I second.
We have a second from trustee Jennings. Any further discussion? Any public comments? All those in favor of assigning the timeline and authority? Thank you.
And then lastly, the recommendation to procure separate services for general counsel and fiduciary counsel.
Say that again?
Do we,
To separate them out,
is that something the
They
ad
were
hoc
already-
committee
We need to do that
itself
now?
can decide
It's just that we chose
as
to
they?
that,
It doesn't make sense.
Maytag,
I
that
think
feels like that
separate
should
anyway.
be a decision at this level, no?
For the separate.
I think
I'm sorry,
we,
what was
Well, I think-
is the question whether or not you need to separately, separate out those two functions for the purposes of the RFP, or what's
Yes.
the question?
Is that a board level decision, or can we delegate that to the ad hoc committee?
I believe it's a board level decision
Yeah.
because
That's what I
you
thought
do
too.
have currently under contract those two services.
But
okay.
it wasn't a requirement. I mean, it's not like, all right, so help me understand this. As far as I understand.
Yeah, were they
So-
separate and we have,
We just-
always
So
and
let
we
me,
have to
let me,
have
let
one
me
firm?
take it at a higher level, and
Yeah.
I'm not gonna speak on the propriety of this at any
Yeah.
level, but what I'm gonna say is under the, and I'll give you the legal landscape, and you guys can decide from there, which is under the current municipal code sections, it allows the boards to contract out for legal services, and each contract is in the name of the board. Currently, you have different contracts for different levels of services as you've designated out and separated out. So based on that, whether or not you want to separately contract for those services or not is up to the board under the Muni Code.
And in reading through the documentation, different people bid on it, and whatever, it just so happened that Reed Smith bid on it and got the award for both. So I don't know why we have to vote on this when it's
I don't-
already
Barbara,
determined.
if I may ask a question, I do believe that they were procured as a single service.
Yeah, I
and
think,
then
I
for
think,
both
actually, I
roles.
think trustee Jennings, you're right, and this is going to come down to how the RFP is worded. Last time the RFP had general and fiduciary, so it wasn't split out, but this time we would, which I think the ad hoc committee would get involved in the wording of the RFP, would just have general services, fiduciary services, investment tax.
It gives the board the option to select two different providers for each of those services versus locking them in to one provider for both services.
Okay, so just for the sake of clarity, let's have a board motion to separate these out. Obviously, a single firm can bid on all five. Of course. Or any subset thereof.
That's my understanding.
I will make that motion.
Okay, so we have a motion from trustee Chandra. Do we have
And
a
I'll
second?
second it.
We have a second, Vice Chair Jennings. Any further discussion, any public comment? Seeing none, all those in favor of approaching the RFP in that way? And opposed? None. Thank you. And now for the main event that I know we're all waiting for, which is, I know I do every year, our educational session with Chiron on actuarial matters.
Good morning. Let me share my screen here. Okay. So we're going to start off our series of actuarial meetings doing an educational session on actuarial funding. We recognize that there's a wide range of experience on the board, and so we're going to try, some of this will be refresher for the more seasoned trustees and hopefully building up the base for the newer trustees, but hopefully there's something new in here for everyone. I'm here with Stephen Hastings, who works with me on the Federated pension valuations. And so we're gonna go through this. Please feel free to interrupt and ask a question as we go through the educational presentation. This presentation will be longer than the next presentation on economic assumptions that we think we can go through very quickly. So. Funding a pension plan. We've shown this several times at board meetings, but this graphic was originally published back in 1965. The fundamentals have not changed. Over the long-term horizon, contributions plus investment returns have to add up to the benefits paid and the expenses paid. And so those have to balance not each and every year, but over the long run. Starting at the bottom on the graphic, the benefits are controlled by the municipal code and collective bargaining. So that's not really something that this board gets involved in or we get involved in, except to comment on proposals and price proposals. You spend a lot of time addressing the investment policy and what the strategy is there. As actuaries, we're not involved in that. Our involvement is really on setting the contributions and what the contribution policy should be for the plan, for the board. The municipal code separates how much of those contributions are paid by the city and how much by the employees. But we develop the work with you to develop the overall contribution policy. Now, when we're doing that, there are three objectives that we keep in mind, and they compete to a certain extent, and so we have to find the proper balance. First and foremost, we want to ensure benefit security. We want to make sure that we have contributed enough so that there are assets in the fund to pay the benefits when they're due. We do not want the fund to run out of money. Secondarily, we consider generational equity. Now, ideally, the taxpayers in each generation pay for the retirement benefits of the employees who provided services to that generation. Our actuarial methods are designed to do that. The problem or the difficult questions on generational equity come when a prior generation either intentionally or unintentionally did not end up paying for all of the cost of those retirement benefits. And so how do we allocate those costs going forward now that we're in a new generation as well. And then contribution stability and predictability. Both members, employees, and the city have budgets to manage. And if the contributions were volatile and bouncing around every year, it makes it very difficult to manage a budget process. And so we want to both communicate changes in contributions to the extent we can, and limit volatility so that they aren't going up and down all the time. We may need to move to a different level, either higher or lower. We try and do that in reasonable steps, keeping all the other objectives in mind. So when we do evaluation, we start by gathering all the census information, individual data. We apply the plan provisions of the promised benefits and make necessary assumptions to project out future benefit payments. And so the chart on the right is showing those projected future benefit payments, or a portion of them. Then we discount those for interest. So you can see here, the dark part of the bar is the undiscounted, or the discounted benefit payment, and the light part of the bar is the interest discount. The idea being, we would need today the dark part of the bar, and then it would accumulate with expected investment returns covering the light part of the bar, so that by the time that date came, we'd have all the assets to pay those benefits. So then we eliminate the interest discount part, we add all those up, and that gives us a present value. And if I can control my mouse, I'll show you the present value. I'm getting the Zoom controls mixed in here, so I'll skip that. But we just add all those up, and that gives us the present value. Now, for active members, we allocate that cost between past service and future service. So that's part of planning it as that generation goes through. And so we do this on an individual basis. So on the right-hand side, we're showing this funding target. This is the amount of assets we expect to need by the time this individual retires. And we're just assuming we have someone hired at age 30 that retires at age 60. And we look at their career projection of earnings. So we make assumptions about salary increases and so forth, and try and develop a cost that is a level percentage of their pay each year that becomes these yellow bars. And that, over time, will accumulate to the present value. So each year, you pay that little yellow bar. Now, the scale has changed, but those little yellow bars are the same as what's on the left. And the gray bar is just the accumulation, and it accumulates with interest, which is the green bar, so that by the time the person retires, you've accumulated the assets you need to pay for their benefits. So that's the idea behind the actual cost method, is to accumulate those assets during someone's career so that you have sufficient assets when they retire to pay all their benefits. So if I can move on here. There we go. Turn it to Stephen.
Okay, so this one's on. So the normal costs that Bill was just discussing for an individual, we add those up for everyone that is there as of the valuation date, the census, so all the active employees, and you take that total and you divide it by the payroll for those folks, and you get a normal cost rate. The the municipal code defines what portion of that is paid by the members. For tier 1, it's 3/11. For tier 2, it's 1/2. But we do that separately for the 2 tiers, right? Because there's a different benefit structure. And on the right side here, we're showing the normal cost rates as of the most recent completed valuation. But you can see that the totals, 25.3% for tier 1 and 15.62% for tier 2. And this, the split there is different as assigned by the municipal code. So that's how we get these normal cost rates. We take it's basically a present value of 1 more year's accrual across all the active members, add that up, compare it to the salary, and you get a normal cost rate. And this rate can change for a few different reasons. When the weighted average changes, so that the population is different, right, from year to year. So as the population changes, that can change. If assumptions change, that changes your normal cost rate. And if the plan provisions change, that changes your normal cost rate. So if all of our assumptions are met every year, right, the contributions will exactly equal the normal cost. And the one thing we can tell you with certainty is that won't happen. So experience will not exactly match the assumptions, and assumptions can change over time. So how do we account for that, right? What do you do when that happens? So the objective is to get back to where the funding target, needs to be in a reasonable period, without having too much volatility in your contributions. And there are two main mechanisms we use there. Asset smoothing is one, and amortizations is another. So if you look at the right side, we're showing the funding target, and the normal cost payment is that little piece at the top of the funding target. So that's a current year's accruals, the present value of that. And so that is something that is paid in a given year. But then if you look at the assets, there is a shortfall, right? So that shortfall between the assets and the funding target is your unfunded actuarial liability, and we need to make a payment on that. So that is the red piece we're showing. And the amortization period, amortization method determines what that payment is. So we'll get into that a little bit more in a couple slides here. But first we're looking at asset smoothing. So probably the biggest, the largest component of gains and losses in a year is the asset returns, right? So investment returns can cause a lot of volatility, and there's 5-year smoothing in this system to try to address that. So the gains and losses are recognized over 5 years. We'll go over that in the next slide. But the main takeaway on this slide is if you look at the actuarial value of assets that has the smoothing, that's the green line, you can see that it's there's more stability there versus the blue line that's jumping around a bit more, and that's the market value. So we'll get into some of the mechanics of that on the next slide. So each year we have you have an expected return, right? Your discount rate is also your asset return assumption of 6.625%. You look at the assets at the beginning of the year, cash flows during the year, and you can apply that rate and come up with an expected return. So here we're showing in blue the expected returns each year. In yellow, we're showing the actual return. So you can see that is not, in some years it's close to the expected return, but in other years, look at 2021, the actual return was way, way above the expectation. And then some of that, you gave some of that back the following year. But the difference between those, the blue and the yellow, is the green here, and that's the investment gain or loss. So the difference between your actual return versus your expected return. And we look at that piece, that investment gain or loss, and 20% of it gets recognized each year because it's a 5-year smoothing. So on the right-hand side, a piece of each one of those or a portion of the gains and losses is not yet recognized. So if you look at the far right, 2023, there's that $37 million gain. Only 20% of that is recognized. So you see there's a darker green strip there. 2022, 40%. So the darker part is larger. 2021, 60% of that has been recognized so far, and so on. So 5-year smoothing, the gains and losses aren't immediately recognized, and if you have more losses than gains, right, that have not been recognized, then your market value will be lower than your actuarial, and vice versa. So there is some difference there. Okay, so that was one of the ways we try to manage volatility. Another way is the amortization policy. And again, we're trying to balance, the period to get to make up for some shortfall with the stability of contributions and affordability as well. But so when we combine that with the asset smoothing, actually, the period can be even longer. So there's a point to make there. But the municipal code splits these payments as well. So for Tier 1, 100% is paid by the city, these amortization payments. And for Tier 2, it's split 50-50 with the members. On the right-hand side, we show the types of amortizations. And we're showing, there's a few columns there. One is the model policy. It's based on a Conference of Consulting Actuaries paper, sort of a best practices approach. And then on the other two columns, we're showing the federated Tier 1 and Tier 2, what's actually being done there. So the type is layered amortization in all three cases. So what that means is each year you come up with your gains or losses and create a new base, right, that gets paid off over a certain period. And over time, you end up with a bunch of layers, right? And some are being paid off each year, and then new ones are being created each year. So for gains and losses experience, the model is 15 to 20 years. Right now, Federated is at 20 years, and a Tier 1, I mean, and Tier 2 is at 10 years. For assumption changes, that you can go a little longer there. 25 years is where Federated Tier 1 is. Plan changes are at 20 years. Now those, it sort of depends on the plan demographics. You don't the maturity of the plan. Sorry.
I was just confused about why there's a difference between Tier 1 and Tier 2 in terms of assumption changes.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. Probably should have just went down the Tier 1 column first. But you can see Tier 1 is pretty closely aligned with what is showing in the model policy. But there are situations when you can deviate from the model policy, and for Tier 2, because it is so much less mature, you don't have a huge population of retirees.
Yes.
Sort of leveraging things. But the 10 years was adopted there because the plan is still not as mature, and it's easier to pay those pieces off more quickly.
Okay.
At the point it was as mature as Tier 1, there's no way that we would recommend 10 years.
So you're trying to balance two things. You've got the contribution stability piece, which would argue for as long an amortization period as possible, because that would keep your contribution stable. Sure. But you also, overriding, you want to get back to 100% funded as soon as possible. So in the debate on the model policy, the reason the short end is 15 years is for a typical plan, if you go shorter than that, it gets too volatile. The contributions get too volatile. Okay. That was not a constraint on Tier 2 because of how young and growing it is. You can take a pretty substantial gain or loss, and making it up is a very minor thing because it's small now compared to what's happening later.
Yeah.
So, so we made I think we made that decision back in 2017 when we were looking at that and said, well, 10 years will keep us closer to 100%. And so as long as we can afford that volatility, we'll stick with that. But as Stephen said, if you get, once you get a sizable portion of retirees, you won't be able to withstand that 10-year amortization.
I have a question. That doesn't impact, does that impact what the employees pay? Because it's,
It does for Tier 2.
so they paying more because of?
They pay 50% of it. And so whether
So
they
because
pay
it's
more or
10
not,
years versus 20?
it's getting them back to 100% more quickly so that you're keeping that UAL payment from becoming large. But it is more volatile than the longer, but if you look at what the UAL payments for Tier 2 are, they are very small.
Because you're
and
doing 10 versus 20.
Well, it's because it's 10, and it's because it's a small amount of assets and a large payroll in comparison.
Most of the UAL was accumulated back in 2009, when Tier 2 didn't yet exist. So they have the burden of the big UAL.
Right.
So the UAL for Tier 2 is quite small. I don't know if you have a slide on that coming up, but.
No, I know that.
Okay.
I was just wondering if one tier versus another, especially since they're 50%. are
We do
paying
have a
more.
comparison of the amortization payments later, and so we can show you the scale difference there.
So the last piece to comment on is payment growth. So, you know, if you have a period of 25 years in these payments, how do those payments grow over time, right? So 0% would be just a flat dollar payment amount. Up to 3% would be, well, 3% would be like the payroll growth. So for the federated plans, the board settled on 2.75, which is in between for the inflation rate and the assumed payroll growth. And the advantage of having that a bit lower than your payroll growth is, I guess, it sort of gives you a little bit of a buffer if your payroll doesn't grow as fast as that 3% assumption. Okay, so what is the impact of these different amortization periods? So, and this is analogous to a mortgage, right? You have this amount you're trying to pay off, and over time there's the split of each payment changes between what portion of it is going to principal and what portion is going to interest. So here we're starting with a 20-year payment period, and you can see, given the assumptions of 6.625 discount rate and the 2.75 payment increase, you can see that the outstanding balance on the right starts to drop immediately. So a little bit, but.
On the left.
Sorry, on the left. I said it right, yeah. So the outstanding balance on the left starts to drop immediately, and that sort of accelerates over time. You can also see that on the right, the green portion is the principal portion of the payment. So there is principal being paid from the onset. And the blue is the interest over time. And then I'll turn it over to Bill to discuss what things look like when you start changing the periods.
So we also have a 25-year amortization period. So I just wanted to show that briefly. The initial payment on that 25-year amortization period is right around just paying the interest. It's actually slightly less than paying the interest in that first year. And so the balance grows a little bit. But over time, it starts paying down the UAL. And we're going to get into a little bit later of how did Federated get where it is today. And so to preface that, I wanted to go back to what was the policy in 2007. So in 2007, we used an 8.25% discount rate and 4% salary growth. And so you can see the initial payments were below interest, and so it was accumulating more unfunded liability for quite some time. Well, that's if we stuck with that 30-year amortization. But back in 2007, the policy was actually what's called a rolling amortization, which means every year we re-amortized it over 30 years. And so you never paid the interest on the unfunded liability. The unfunded liability was designed to keep growing if we met our expected assumptions. The only thing that would bring it back is if we had investment gains to offset past losses. So once you incurred the losses, the expectation was really a growing unfunded liability until you could get investment performance or other performance that would bring you back in line. And so that's one of the key considerations in setting those amortization parameters is we want to be covering at least the interest with the initial payment or very soon thereafter. And so 25 becomes kind of that upper limit. And we only do that for assumptions because we give a little break on assumptions because you are, in essence, you're capitalizing future losses. So you think you need to make an assumption change. You could not make the assumption change and then you just have more losses every year. But by making that assumption change, you're essentially taking those future losses off the table. So we'll give you a little bit more time if you make that assumption change to get it paid off.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
When did they change from the 8.25 to the 6.6 and 5/8?
Well, to get all the way down, that took time. We'll
I-
show you
that's what I
that
thought.
in a little bit. They went, in 2009, they made the first step. And then it gradually
Yeah.
went down after that.
Because I think that was pretty common with most pension plans, is they had a much more aggressive assumption for return on investments. And so it looked
It
like they
was.
were fully funded or almost fully funded, right?
Yeah, and when we get into the economic presentation, I'll show you a little bit of history of what drove that. And
Yeah.
your history is not unusual in
Yeah.
terms of those rates. So Stephen mentioned layered amortization. And so these are the layers that we did in 2023. We had an assumption change and we had an experience loss. The loss was mostly salary increases, and the assumption change was mostly capturing the future salary increases that had been negotiated. So the assumption change, on the left here I have tier 1, and you can see the 25-year payment for the purple assumption change and the 20-year payment for the gold experience loss. And the orders flipped on the tier 2 side here, but you can see those impacts. Now that's just what we did for 1 year. When you roll back in time, we've been doing that every valuation. And so there's a whole history of these layers. And so you can look at the tier 2 layers versus the tier 1 layers. This is what was remaining as of the 2023 valuation, where each bar is a different layer. This dark blue is, we started the layers in 2009 and took the entire UAL in 2009. And that was spread over 30 years because it was considered too much to take care of in 20 years. And so that goes out to 2040. And so when you look at our contribution projections, you'll see a big drop at that point. And that's because we've finally paid off that 2009 amortization. But these things all stack up, and the teal line is the net payment. Now here's where you can see the difference in scale. We've got tier 2 on the right, tier 1 on the left. The top of the tier 1 scale is 220 million a year, and the top of the tier 2 scale is 7 million a year. So the tier 2 payments, will that pop up for me here? Well, the tier 2 payments were a little over 4 million for the current fiscal year, whereas it's about 170 million for tier 1. So that's why we can afford the 10-year, that's with the 10-year amortization as
Right.
opposed to it, and that's why we can afford that. Now, if you look at these, now I'm back to aggregate, I'm not splitting out the tiers, but if you look at the aggregate contributions for 2025, if we were 100% funded, this is what the contributions would be. We have the member contributions going in, the city's normal costs. So those 2 purple bars cover the normal cost, which is the cost of the benefits for that year. And the green is the administrative expenses. And so we'd have a 20% of pay contribution rate, about $91 million. But we have a UAL. And so this number here is just the interest on the UAL. I don't know if this right chart's going to work unless I can get the Zoom controls off my screen. There we go. So remember, the UAL is going to accumulate with interest each year. So we got to pay the interest in order to keep it from growing. And then we also pay a bit of principal. And so I just wanted to remind people how much of this contribution, we have a relatively high contribution. These totals, often we just show the total as the city total. These totals include the member, so that they're a little higher. But how much of the contribution is really going towards the UAL as opposed to the cost of the benefits that employees are earning today? Now, these 2 charts are from our survey of California retirement systems, and the appendix in this presentation has a link to this survey. You can go online, it's on our website, and play around with it and look at all the different measures and compare Federated to all the different systems. But here, because I've selected Federated, the gold dot is Federated in these charts. And the left hand and the bars represent the range from the lowest to the highest among California systems. So there's 39 California systems in this survey. And so if you look at the funded ratio on the left, we've always been among the lowest. Now, we were, in 2007, we were 90% funded, so that was not bad. But even then, we were among the lowest in the state. And as things progressed, for a while, we were the lowest. We've moved up off the bottom a bit. And you can click on these, and it will bring up, this is the actual distribution in 2023. The blue dot is Federated, and you can look and see who else is below us. Well, it's a couple transit plans, San Diego Transit and Golden State Transit. So that's where we are. Now, the reason our costs are so high are both because we have a large unfunded liability and because that unfunded liability is a large percentage of our payroll. Paying interest on that unfunded liability is a very high percentage of our payroll. And you can see that on this chart. That's what this is measuring. And we've been among the top in that category. You'd expect that with us being poorly funded. The piece that's a little bit interesting here is police and fire has been right around the median funded percentage. But they are right next to us in terms of interest costs on the UAL as a percent of payroll. And so that's why the combination of the two plans has been a pretty significant burden for the city of San Jose, because just paying the interest on the unfunded liability is a substantial portion of payroll.
So I'm wondering one thing, and you probably don't have the numbers, but if we look at where we are from a funded perspective on a US basis, do we look substantially different, or is it kind of the same? I mean, is California unique, or is this probably
That's a very
what
good
we would
question.
expect?
And we will, I think we show that normally when we present the valuation.
Yeah.
Because we do compare to the public plan database as well. You're not in the public plan database, so we can't just pull it up. We have to like overlay you. But if you look at funded ratios in the public plan database, and compare them to the California plans tend to be better funded.
Oh.
So I guess I'd say you have more company. There's a full range of funded ratios, but in the national data, you have more company.
So we're actually paying interest, right? I mean, there's money going out of the city paying interest on the UAL? It's not just a number?
Right, you first pay the interest on the UAL, and then you pay more to make the UAL get smaller.
And the interest rate, do you know what that is? What do we pay?
It's our assumed rate of return.
Yeah.
So the reason is,
But we're not
if you
paying
didn't
that.
have the UAL,
Mm-hmm.
you'd have that much more assets in the plan expected to earn 6 5/8.
Right.
We're not actually paying it like paying a bond.
Right.
Or a mortgage. We're not actually paying that out of the city, but that's how we calculate what we owe on the UAL.
And it's taking away from from the rest that could grow.
So we're not actually paying the UAL
We're not writing checks.
to any agency or anything like that?
Not
We're
to,
just
no,
reporting.
those payments go into the trust.
Yeah.
Oh, it goes into the trust. Okay.
Because
And we're charging a
because you
discount
should
rate.
have, according
Okay.
to the funding plan, you
Okay.
should have more assets in the trust. And so this is the payment to get the assets back up.
Right.
Okay. So the city's paying that
Yes.
to go there.
Yeah, it's mostly the city's payment.
Yeah.
Right, and a little bit of
A little bit from the employees.
A little bit of, a very small amount from Tier 2 members. So this chart is showing all the changes to the UAL since 2007. So the first number is 2009. Back in 2007, they did valuations every other year. So it's showing what changed was picked up in the 2009 valuation. So that particular one is a 2-year period. But everything else is each year, how did the unfunded liability change, going from the 90% funded to the 60% funded, and what caused it? And that was an increase of about $1.7 billion in unfunded liability. And so I'm going to isolate some things here so that we can focus on some changes. First, benefit changes have not been a significant factor. There was a reduction in 2012 when there was a special benefit called the SRBR that was eliminated. So that reduced things. The
SRBR?
2017,
Payout?
what?
What was that?
It was called the SRBR, the Supplemental Retiree Benefit Reserve, that
Okay.
gave an additional COLA piece to retirees based on investment earnings. In 2017, that was the changes to Tier 2 that happened, so that was a pretty small piece. I want to show you, let's see, let's do contributions. So contributions here, when they're above the zero line, that means the contributions were not enough to pay the normal cost plus interest. So that shortfall is increasing the UAL. When they're below the line, we are paying more. So you can see the transition period. After the 2009 losses, we increased contributions quite dramatically, but the UAL had gone up very dramatically. And we were starting from well below normal cost plus interest. So over time, we've been building that up to get it up so that we are paying it down, and we crossed that figure between 2018 and 2019. And so going forward, the contributions are actually paying down the UAL. They have been since 2019, but before that, they weren't. So what else has contributed? Well, liability gains and losses. Those are all our assumptions other than the investment return. Those, some are above and some are below. They're normally not very large. The last couple of years, we've had some of the larger ones, and that's really because of the salary increases that came in response to the high inflation. That's really the largest piece of that.
I remember that you had designated something about reciprocity. When people leave, you know, then they get paid, you know, if they keep their money in, they get paid out.
Yeah, that would be a very tiny piece here. But we did work on that assumption because it was providing some consistent losses, but it only affected people who leave the city and go work in a reciprocal position.
And, you know, to be honest, as long as the city continues to keep the non-pensionable, that I guess it turned out it was only like $1 million or $2 million to really reassess that. But if the city continues to do that, I think you're going to see a trend where people are not going to retire from the city of San Jose. They'll go somewhere else and get that reciprocity just to get rid of that non-pensionable. And then because they go to another municipality that will pay them more, that will take even more out of our system. Whereas these people might not have left the city if they weren't incentivized to leave. So I would keep your eye on that one. I'm not going to be here, but I'm telling you, I think you're going to see a trend there. Unless the city decides $1 million or $2 million isn't that much and gets rid of it.
Yeah, so we will continue to monitor that, and we'll look at that in the next experience study as well.
Yeah.
One of the big issues over the years has been the investment return compared to our expected return. This is showing it, we say AVA, actuarial value of assets. So this is in comparison to the 5-year smoothed returns. So the 2008-9 losses are spread out over all these years right here. So it's not necessarily exactly what you would see intuitively because it's reflecting that 5-year smoothing because that's how we're calculating the UAL for contributions. But having said that, you can see until the last 3 years, we had just been dominated by losses. So those last 3 years, add on 5 to get the smoothing effects, it's really turned it around. And we hope that's what we see going forward, depending on market conditions.
Yeah.
And certainly the first quarter of this fiscal year looks good. But that has been a significant component. The other significant component is the assumption changes. And so these are going from 8 1/4 down to 7 3/4, down to 7 1/2, down to 7 1/4, those sorts of things. There were also, this plan had significant other assumption changes. In 2011, we had a significant change related to refunds that increased costs. The prior assumption had way too many assumed refunds. And then I think it was 2015 is when we adopted generational mortality. But the thing I want to point out here is notice that those bars are getting smaller. So we've made a lot of those corrections. The experience is much closer to what we're expecting. We're not expecting a significant change going forward. So I think that's, who knows what the market will do, what the economy will do, how things will change, but we've been getting much closer to what the experience is. So now, if you add all these up, let me get them all back on here. You can see over that period the accumulated size of them. And the investment returns accounted for $660 million, and the assumptions for $881 million since 2007. So that's pretty much all of the increase in the UAL. There's obviously a small piece there from liability gains and losses, relatively small, of 166. And then the contribution piece is getting smaller each year as we pay those down.
I have a question. I'm not sure why this is not working. What was the assumption change in 2009 and 11, which contributed to such a huge increase in the UAL?
So in 2011?
Yes, 9 and 11 both.
So 9 was, the big assumption change in 2009 was reducing the discount rate.
Right.
And in 2011, it was both a further reduction in the discount rate and the refunds, is my recollection, was the other big item. There were changes to retirement rates and termination rates and stuff that were in there as well.
Thank you.
So, and I think 2013 was like an 8th point. We went down to 7.5, then I can't remember if we did 7 3/8. And then
Don't we have another
7 1/4.
slide that actually shows the progression of discount rates over time? I don't know if that's in the next presentation.
I think I have the full progression.
No? Okay.
We have shown that before, but I don't think I had it in the deck. So that's the background I really wanted to cover. We get asked a lot how we got where we are, and so tried to lay out a bit of that. Is really substantially the reduction in assumed investment returns, as well as some other assumption changes, and then lower actual investment returns than what we had assumed before 2021. Since then, the investments have done well on the smooth basis. And then initially, it was also the contribution policy. We think that contribution policy has really been corrected and transitioned from a weak to a pretty strong policy. It takes a long time to recover, though, once you have a large system that has become unfunded like this. So we know the contributions are high compared to other similar plans, but that is part of what's happening is we have high contributions to pay down that unfunded and get things back to 100%. We do think, especially given our experience, we want to make sure we have reasonable assumptions, and if anything, we want to have a slight conservative bias to those assumptions going forward so that we are recovering and getting closer to 100% funded and don't have something that drives us the other direction. So, any questions?
Any
Additional
other
thoughts?
questions from
Additional
trustees?
questions? That's a good one.
Well, that was the lecture. Next comes the lab, where we actually apply what we just learned to our evaluation of discount rates and other assumptions. So if there are no further questions, no public comments, let us segue into the next presentation. By the way, slide number 13, it doesn't show year by year the discount rates, but it does show over time our decline in discount rates that have contributed to the assumption changes that you just asked about, Raji.
So I just wanted to say that that was really helpful to understand the whole context.
Yeah.
And
Great.
we may have seen some of it last year, but it really helps us focus again on what's happening and why the unfunded liabilities are so large and what things have happened.
Indeed.
And you
Hopefully
really need
improve it.
reiteration after reiteration.
Yeah.
It takes a while.
You got it after 2 board meetings,
You're ahead of the
I'm
curve.
not sure, but
Took me years.
Yeah,
I'm getting it.
and
I
still,
think.
you know, I mean, this is their day job, you know, this is what they do, right? Kind of
Well,
statistician.
but we've spent a career trying to figure out how
That's
to
what I
explain
mean,
it.
yeah. So, you know, you kind of got that, but,
And now we apply.
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
now we
Going-
apply.
I'm
Yeah.
not sure I'd be able to explain the slides.
No, no.
Yeah.
Well, luckily, there is no quiz.
Except
I
the
always
final.
imagine myself, okay, you've just gotten the presentation, now you have to explain it to your class.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, this one takes a long time.
Okay, before I get into the economic assumptions, I just wanted to warn you that you're going to see us a lot in the next few months.
Yeah.
So this is our
Be afraid.
normal schedule, monthly, going through the valuation process, both the pension and the OPEB. And so today, we're really just going to do the economic assumptions that apply mostly to the pension plan. Some of them apply to both. But before I get to that, even, we always give you just a quick update to our projections based just on the asset information. So we get the assets in September, and so we can just plug that into our model and kind of update where we are. And so we calculated a return of about 8.6%. That's going to be a little different than what your investment consultant reports because ours reflects our estimated cash flow and theirs is a time-weighted, but they should be close. The market value funded ratio, the funded ratio based on the market value of assets, we're projecting an increase from 59% to 62. On the actuarial smooth value, from 58 to 61. And you can see that the UAL is estimated to go down by 100 to 200 million, depending on the measure. Now, that's just with the investment returns, so it doesn't reflect changes in the census or any of the other things. The left side shows the projection of how we expect the UAL to be paid off And the blue line is what the projection was from the last valuation. So you're seeing just the impact of the investment return for this year. Here, you're seeing the same thing looking at the impact on contributions. There's not really any impact to member contributions, a slight impact on the Tier 2 side, but in aggregate, not really an impact. So it's mostly an impact on city contributions. And you can see that because we're only recognizing 20% of that investment gain this year, the initial impact is really small. Overall, it's still small, but it grows over the next 5 years as we recognize all of that investment gain. So overall, though, the projections are very close to what they were last valuation.
In that previous slide, what are we looking at here? Why are there two different? They're listed.
The
as
left
something-
side, I'm sorry, the left side is percent of
Rates?
pay,
I
and
see
the right
it.
side is
Thank
dollar
you.
amounts. And so I should point that out, because we are projecting the rate as a percent of pay to go down every year, even as the dollar amount is creeping up every year.
Thank you.
So, our economic assumptions. We review these every year. We do all the other demographic assumptions every 4 years. We did that last year, so we're not doing that this year. So we're just looking at price inflation, wage inflation, that amortization payment increase rate, and the discount rate or expected rate of return. Spoiler alert, we are not proposing any changes. And so given that, we've abbreviated some of the presentation. We plan to skip through some slides. If you want to argue with our recommendations or get more detail, let us know and we can go back and cover it. But the intent, since we're not really proposing changes, is to just show you what's confirming the assumptions.
If you can add another spoiler alert, of these 4 assumptions, which ones are the most consequential and which are the least consequential, and how are they consequential relative to each other?
So we'll get to that, but the most consequential is the discount rate or expected rate of return, by far.
By far?
By far.
All right, thank you.
Wage inflation, which is connected also to price inflation, also has an impact. But discount rate by far.
Okay, so price inflation underlies the other assumptions, but as far as a direct impact on the val, the valuation doesn't have much of a direct impact. On slide 8, we're looking at different forecasts, and the yellow diamond is the current assumption for the Federated plan. Bottom line here is, you know, you're right in the reasonable range on all these different forecasts on different professional forecasters versus surveys of investment consultants, and also Makita's most recent assumptions are 2.4% for inflation over 10 years and 2.8 over 20. So everything we're seeing here says, hey, it's fine to leave this assumption as is.
I believe for Tier 2, union negotiated a higher COLA for the past few years. So are you assuming like more of a long-term inflation rate? Is
So
that the reason for-
the COLA is separate from inflation, but it is tied. So Tier 2 has a COLA that's tied to inflation that caps at different levels depending on your length of service. None of those get affected if we keep the assumption at 2.5, because the cap is lower.
And that would be reflected in the wage inflation as opposed to price inflation, is that correct?
Well, no, the COLA is for retirees.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, got it.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know if you were referring to the cost of, or to bargaining agreements that increase some of the wage
Yeah, I was
inflation.
referring to the bargaining agreements, and I think
Oh,
those
okay.
inflations were high. I'm wondering where is that incorporated?
So that's our wage inflation when
Yeah.
we look at the bargaining.
So that's a good segue to the next slide. So wage inflation is a bit over and above price inflation, so that, and there are reasons for that, but the current assumption is 3%, so 50 basis points over, so over the inflation assumption, and this is sort of the across-the-board expectation of wage increases, right? There's also a separate component for merit and longevity, that sort of thing. But here it does key off of the current bargaining agreements in the near term, and the two new agreements are for groups that aren't, they're not the largest groups, and we're not seeing enough of an impact there to warrant a change.
The two new ones are in italics, which is a little bit
They're
hard
the
to see.
engineers and then the,
IBEW and operating engineers.
OE3,
And
the maintenance staff.
the other thing I'd say is this 7/1/2024 increase gets included in our data. So really, for the assumption, we're looking at the 2025 and 2026 increases. And you can see that theirs is slightly higher than what we had for all the other groups, but if you do a weighted average, is what Stephen's saying, it just didn't
Also,
move the
they
needle.
don't have the non-pensionable.
Well,
I'm never gonna let that one die, sorry, Bill. That is such a bad move, and it just doesn't retain longevity for the employees. It's such a disincentive. And it will cost us. It will.
So again, we're applying a single rate across all these groups. So, and that rate is 3.5% in the next 2 years. Then the ultimate rate is 3%. So, again,
The 3.5% can be 4%, Trustee Avasti, depending on the projected, the proposed budget, what it is for revenue, yeah. So we'll see. Times are not good right now, so we'll see.
Right.
Okay, so we discussed this a bit earlier, but there's an assumption about the rate of increase in the amortization payment. And again, that is currently 2.75%, which is in between, right in the middle of inflation and your ultimate wage inflation assumption. So we're proposing no change there as well.
Okay, discount rate. I already said this, it's the most powerful, so I'm gonna move on. Here's the history we have. So we did not break down every year of what your discount rate was, but it was 8.25% for a long time. And between 2007 and 2015, we came down to 7. And then we've been at 6.625 since, I think, 2020 is when we changed to that. The reason you're seeing all those declines is really driven by changes in interest rates. You can think of an expected return as a risk-free rate plus an expected risk premium on your investments. And here we're using that yield on the 10-year Treasury as the proxy for what a risk-free rate is. And so you had to beat the yield on a 10-year Treasury by more and more as yields went down. And so not just for your plan, but broadly across the country, what we saw was a blend of both reducing that expected rate of return and changes in asset allocation to try and reach the higher expected risk premium. What's changed now in the last 2 years is a pretty dramatic change where interest rates rose, driven by the Fed's actions. And so now that expected risk premium is much smaller. The fundamental question we have to ask is that going to be a new long-term reality, or is that a temporary blip? And so that's kind of the theme of our discussion here. We, every year, we look at the expected returns provided by Makita based on your asset allocation. We also compare those to the average expected returns in a survey of investment consultants done by Horizon. And so we've got both of those calculations here. I want to just focus on the middle here between the 45th and 55th percentile, because people get hung up on being exactly where the expected return is. So let's look at it in a little bit of a range there that we might consider acceptable. And I'm just going to jump to the next slide where the gray bars now represent that range from the past, from 2020, 2021, 2022, and then you can see when the Fed took its action, all of a sudden those rates shot up. They've come down in the 10-year time frame. In Makita's assumptions, they've come down slightly. And the bottom here is looking at a 20-year time frame. But you can see we used to be above the 10-year assumption and sort of in the middle of the 20-year assumption. Now we're just slightly below that range for the 10-year, and we're still a ways below it for the 20-year. Now, it's okay to be below the range. Being above it is more problematic, because if you're below the range, you're just saying there's a higher probability we'll get more than the expected return. Long-term, though, we want to be fairly accurate so that we're allocating costs correctly. Oops. So we're not proposing a change this year. It's similar story to what we had last year, that we are concerned that the interest rates may be the thing that's really driving those capital market assumptions up. And as the Fed reduces rates, and they just did 50 basis points, and they're forecast to continue some reductions, that the expected returns may come down again. We know from operating this plan that it is very painful when we reduce discount rates. It affects the members, the city, and their expectations. And so the last thing we want to do is increase the discount rate and then have to reverse course and decrease it again. And so we are saying, let's hold where we are at least another year, see if the future long-term path of expectations would be clearer before we make any moves on the discount rate. So that's our rationale for no change this year on the discount rate. So, any questions?
That makes a lot of sense, because we know that within the markets there can be a lot of volatility, and we've had a couple of really good years. We could have another bad year that could change, our overall returns, although in the long run hopefully we'll be doing better. So it seems very reasonable and conservative to do that, so that way we're protecting the benefits without exposing the city to putting in even more money than they had planned.
So I think at this point, we probably need to have a motion on each of these individual assumptions.
Or I think historically we've done them in aggregate.
We could have an omnibus acceptance of all assumptions as proposed by Chiron. And how amenable to that is, would someone like?
Not that I want to, but how would we handle if we wanted to
to make a change to one of the items.
Well, then we need to
Then you
vote.
pull that out.
Yeah,
If
we
we
need
want
to.
to make a change to all of them, then there would be
Okay.
no omnibus motion. Got it.
Okay, well, let's, maybe we can run through them quickly, and we'll deal with them individually. So, for price inflation, we have it at 2.5%. Caroline has suggested maintaining it at 2.5%. Is there a motion from anyone as to what our price inflation assumption should be for the coming year?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
At 2.5%? Okay.
Oh, so we're gonna do them?
No.
I think we will as a way just to clarify, so that if there is someone who
I'll second that motion.
doesn't wish to have an omnibus, we'll take them individually. I think we can do it quickly. So we have a first and second to maintain at 2.5%. Feel a little like an auctioneer here. Is there any further question or discussion from trustees? Any public comment? There is none. We can vote on price inflation at 2.5%. We are agreed. Now we move to wage inflation. So I'm a
So-
little confused here. I thought you presented that at 3.5%, but is that?
So the 3.5% is the recognition of the current bargaining agreements in the next year. But then ultimately it goes to 3%.
Longer term at 3%. And you have a smoothing mechanism to
It
interpolate
just
the-
steps down by year.
By year,
It'll be
okay.
adjusted if the bargaining.
Right, and then if
amounts
there's
are
a new
different,
negotiation, then of course
Right.
we would
It-
relook at those.
Right,
It's a good
so
placeholder.
the point of stating the assumption that way is that our assumption is to reflect bargaining agreements. And then when the bargaining agreements expire, we assume 3%.
Mhm,
I
I
think
see.
that's fair.
Okay, so I would entertain a motion to, okay. So we have a motion from Vice Chair Jennings, a second from Trustee Linder, to accept Chiron's proposed wage inflation figures. Is there any discussion? Any public comment? We can vote. All those in favor of the motion? It's accepted. The amortization payment increase at 2.75%. And Chiron again is asking that we maintain the current amortization schedule. Is anyone care to make a motion on that?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we approve that.
Okay, is there a second?
I second.
Okay, I heard, we're going to give that, the tie goes to Trustee Abbott. So that's a motion by Trustee Chandra. Any discussion? Any further comment? Hearing none, we can vote. And finally, to the big kahuna, which is the discount rate. We have the current discount rate at 6 5/8%. This is the most consequential.
6.6. Oh, 5.8.
It's 6.625%.
All right.
For those not dealing in the non-fractional world. So
Decimal person.
we can entertain a motion to maintain our discount rate, or a counter motion if anyone would like to change the discount rate.
I move that we keep it at
Okay.
6.625.
Do we have a second? Okay. You're
I'm happy to second.
okay. Well, we're going to give that to. So it's a motion from Trustee Abbott, a second from Trustee Avasti. In terms of discussion, I would just like to observe for the record that, we are at the end of a long process of lowering discount rates from 8.25%. We've maintained it at 6.625% now for over 4 years. All the evidence indicates that if we were to make a move, it would actually be to increase the discount rate and not lower it. So I think the wind is at our back. In terms of, I did ask Bill if you could comment. Our current 5-year rate of return is 8.5%, significantly above 6.625%. How low could our 1-year return go this year and still maintain a 5-year return above 6.625%?
So it's nice that the first year of that 5-year period was 2021.
Mhm.
And so you could get minus 4.6, and you would still have a 5-year average of 6 and 5/8.
Okay. And currently, our fiscal to date is almost 4%, so we could actually go negative 4% and still maintain a 6.625%. So that's fairly fat
Good question.
room
Good
for
answer.
comfort. So if there's any other comments or observations?
Yeah, question, comment, maybe all of the
Mhm.
above. First question, when would you consider advocating we increase the rate? What would be your methodology? Wait a couple of more years to see how markets are performing and the overall macroeconomic? So is there some guideposts that you use?
So this is a topic of a large debate among actuaries.
Yeah.
And my view is I want a more stable sense of where things are going forward. It just feels like there are too many pieces in motion right now that could cause expectations to drop.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, in terms of judgment calls, that's sort of how I feel as well. The other comment I wanted to make is it's not, I understand the logic completely, but it's not necessarily true that when rates increase that we should be so concerned about the delta between it and our discount rate, because as those rates rise, your likely return on your equity portfolio gets hit, and we're not going to make up our unfunded liability through investment returns without seeking equity risk. So they're a bit divorced, and so I just wanted to make sure people don't see those as tied together.
They are certainly not in lockstep.
Right. And indeed, higher interest rates may indicate higher economic growth, which would add to the equity returns.
Could, yeah, it's multiples.
Yeah.
Look, we should have all wished to be board members in the 90s. You would just have an 80% bond portfolio and you'd have a 9 or 10% rate of return.
We are victims of our birth dates. It's certainly an interesting question. I mean, it's probably easy to take the safe route and say, let's wait one more year, let's wait for additional information. The world is always unsettled. The prospects are always unknown. So we will forever face that conundrum.
But I also think we're in such a volatile, I mean.
I don't know
what,
that this is more
15 years-
volatile than any other.
15 days,
yeah,
17 days away from an election.
Which
election.
may or may not have any impact on the markets.
Which
So-
might significantly, depending on where it flows and what happens and the reaction and.
A year from now, we'll be focused on something else that we're worried
But
about.
a year, hopefully.
But I personally do support maintaining the current discount rate. But I did want to acknowledge the sea change, that we're actually in a position to be looking at increasing it for the first time in 15 years, 20 years. This is
Yes.
a sea change in the history of the plan and in economic history.
That is.
So if there's no further discussion or comment, we can vote on maintaining the discount rate at 6 5/8%. All in favor? Opposed? None. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
See you next month.
And the month after that.
Mhm.
And the month after that, I think.
Looking so forward to that. All right.
That's good.
Matthew, you got a lecture all laid out.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Yeah, you can use them.
If you have some delinquent students, you can have them attend our trustee sessions.
Well, you got guest speakers now. that you can-
We are up to 5F, which is a discussion action to authorize the chair to amend our agreement with Roberto Pena, to include reimbursement for housing rental costs, not to exceed an amount of $5,003.92. And I understand that's the total amount to be split between our board and police and fire. And if you wanted to add any word of explanation or on that?
No, my understanding is that this was mostly due to the delay in the recruitment process and the fact that the boards wanted to ensure that Roberto and I had overlapping time, which I greatly appreciate. And that's it.
Okay.
I have a comment. Isn't this kind of like shutting the barn door after the horse has gotten out? But having said that, I think it's a good idea.
I guess that's a true observation. If we turned this down, then Roberto would, not be pleased, and I'm not sure. We would feel we did our duty to to an employee whom we will probably need to consult with in future on
That's true.
various items, so we certainly want to maintain that relationship.
I'll move the action,
Okay.
Mr. Chair. I feel that the overlap was important, and this was the way we could achieve it.
Thank you. That's a motion by
I'll second.
Trustee Keller, second by Vice Chair Jennings. Any further discussion, public comment?
Is it 5,000 per board or is this
Total.
total?
No, that's the total, so that's split between the boards. Police and fire will pay their 2,500, we'll pay our 2,500.
Rent's expensive here, but it's not that expensive.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of place he's living in or, what this entails, but if there's no further questions, all those in favor of the payment? Thank you. Any opposed? None? Okay, discussion and action on executive days for our CIO. I believe we did discuss this last time in closed session, your
No, I
reaction.
thought, I didn't, I mean, I'm
I
having
think
a
we
senior
didn't
moment
approve-
on
I-
a public camera and hot mics. I thought we did this last
I
meeting.
kind of thought we did too, but
If I may.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
So during closed session, we had authorized the labor negotiator to negotiate up to a certain amount for both the merit-based increase and executive days, and negotiate with Purdue to come to an agreement. Under the Brown Act, executive compensation has to be approved in an open public meeting and not on the consent calendar. So now that there's reached an agreement, just like we did with the CEO contract, we need to take formal action in open session.
Okay, so
We had done
we
that.
couldn't have done this until police and fire acted.
Okay.
That's correct.
The short version. So with that, I would entertain a motion then to approve the executive days that we had previously authorized in closed session. So we have
And
a
just for a
motion.
reminder, that was 2.5% merit-based and 5 executive days.
Yeah, it's
Right.
both, so
Okay.
I'm happy to make that motion that we approve it.
Okay, so we have a motion from Vice Chair Jennings, a second from Trustee Chandra. Any further discussion? Any trustee comments? All those in favor, say aye. Those opposed, there are none. It passes. Looking through the committee reports, it looks like Investment Committee hasn't met since August 20th. Chair Chandra, do you have anything other to report for the IC?
That update was provided at the September meeting.
Okay. Similarly, for the Audit Committee, we haven't met since August. Trustee Avasti, anything we need to report? Very good. Governance Committee, Trustee Linda.
Are we actually
Yeah,
meeting
you
on the 31st?
just see the next meetings in December 19th.
Because I saw it
Okay.
got taken off and put back on, I was never sure.
I'm sorry, was there a question there?
Yeah, it's on the audit committee. She's asking.
Next
whether
I was
it's
just
on-
asking if we're really meeting on the 31st, because it got taken off my calendar and put back on, and
Okay.
I wasn't sure where we
A
stood.
special Halloween version
Yeah, I
of
was
the
gonna
Audit
say.
Committee, with or without costumes.
Costumes important.
Coming
yes.
with, coming in
Yeah.
costumes, yeah.
Yeah.
You're coming dressed as an auditor? Yep. Disability Committee, they did meet in September.
We met in September, we did not meet in October, and we're going to be meeting November 20th.
Okay, and JPC hasn't met since April. So believe we have nothing to report there. Education and training, I think you all have seen the attachments for the various conference opportunities. Are there any proposed agenda items? Hearing none, we are in adjournment at 12:10.
Nice moving it through the end there, sir.
Okay.
Recording stopped.